60% of boards agree that emerging risk is insufficiently anticipated by management. As an auditor, I'd like to flag the key element to have in mind when it comes to GenAI and address risk. You need to have the right governance, making sure that the AI is managed properly. Second, you need to consider the regulatory environment and making sure that you don't violate contractual agreements or laws or regulations. Third, making sure that your people are properly trained. And third, making sure that GenAI is not used to perpetrate fraud.
Welcome, Jeanne.
Thank you.
So today we're going to go a little bit deeper and understand your philosophy and how you're approaching all the grand challenges are out there. So I want to start with the question about the world, and that it feels that these days we face extremely complex challenges, disruptions that seem to be quicker and more impactful and more interconnected. What's your view on these trends and their impact on risk climate?
It's true that clients are facing huge challenges today and in order to keep with changes and disruption, they need to adapt and accept the pace of change, which requires them to address. And also something which strikes me is that disruption overlap and interconnect more and more. So it's how are you able to contemplate the whole spectrum of all the assumptions of things that can happen to you?
Right.
There is, by the way, a survey which is called EY Global Risk Survey, which was issued in 2023, saying that not only the nature, but the number of risks is increasing. And example being supply chain disruption, geopolitical events, not a surprise, cyber attacks, data breaches, misalignment of culture also, new market entrants, increased remote and distributed work, to name a few. All right. So sometimes business don't have the time to really scan the horizon, and they have to prepare for a plan and then calmly roll out. It's more a question now of sense of urgency and thinking about the risk of tomorrow with the mindset of the future, but not the mindset of the past. And this shift in mind is something that was described, by the way, this morning at the roundtable around rethink.
Yeah.
And I think that business now, they need to adapt at a more rapid pace. And they need to be a lot more agile than they were before. And 60% of boards, by the way, agree that emerging risks are insufficiently anticipated by management. So what is critical, if I had to summarize a key point? First of all, management should ask themselves, are they addressing the right risk? First question. Second question, are they receiving the right information to take decision? And do they have the right reporting, the right data? So quality of accuracy of data is another one. And the third one, for me, is the most important one, is now you need to embrace the whole ecosystem you are working in. So you just not need to limit yourself to what's happening within the company, but also outside of your company, how you deal with your stakeholders, what are the risks of the overall ecosystem. And that, for me, is really something new. So to cope with the magnitude of change, I think we really need to make sure that we need to address all connected problems. So connection is a key word to summarize the overall description of what I said so far.
Fantastic. And given the rapid adoption of GenAI, what do you see as the biggest risks facing organizations today? And whose job is it to assure users that AI is trustworthy and reliable? And could you say how that could be achieved?
Yeah, I'd like to summarize the different situation that we are facing with corporate at the moment when it comes to AI.
Right.
First of all, you have one category, which is the category of those who do not want to move at all. So they consider that they are doing the right things at the right pace and just static.
Yeah.
In that case, of course, the risk of disruption, of being disrupted, is huge. Second category is a risk, and this is a situation where what we see the most, I would say, is not moving fast enough. And what are the reasons for not moving fast enough? I would say a few ones. First is about the skill gap. Second is about the infrastructure to deal with new technology. And third is about the quality of the data. So it's a pretext sometimes not to move, because you say, until we don't have the right data, or we don't have the right system, or we don't have the right resources, we prefer not to change, or we do it at a pace that is our pace.
Right.
And maybe it's not necessarily sufficient to really go in the right direction, given the pace of what we described before. Yeah. And then you have a third category, which is a risk of moving too fast. And what are the consequences of doing that? I would characterize it as being a situation where, especially in our profession, by the way, if I take the example of the audit profession, you need to train people, right? And on-the-job training is what we call something really important. That's where I was looking at my senior partner, the way he was behaving and interacting with the client. And the risk is that you just apply AI and you say it replaces people. And the people have no time to really get trained. And what is really important with GenAI is really to keep the skepticism and the judgment to apply the tool at the right moment with the right thing and the right environment. So being properly trained is something that is required as well when it comes to GenAI. Otherwise, you can misuse, I would say, the potential of GenAI, which to me is a missed opportunity, of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
We can see some of that. And the last one is about the risk of missing the big picture and just applying GenAI for the sake of applying GenAI. And it's really important to really not lose traction of what's your purpose of the company and what you want to stand for, and keep a North Star rather than trying to be on top of things with fancy things and having your employees doing whatever they want. So to summarize, I see three major risk categories when it comes to GenAI. First of all, it's about privacy, and it's cited by 32% of the respondents of the survey we made on that. Second one is about transparency and explainability of what you implement. You need to understand what's behind the algorithm, etc. And the third dimension is a risk of discrimination and bias and lack of fairness, which is also the third category of risk, which is mostly cited by people. So as an auditor, I'd like to flag the key element to have in mind when it comes to GenAI and address risk. You need to have the right governance, making sure that the AI is managed properly. Second, you need to consider the regulatory environment and making sure that you don't violate contractual agreements or laws or regulations. Third, making sure that your people are properly trained. We mentioned that already. And third, making sure that GenAI is not used to perpetrate fraud, or I would say, perpetrate fraud. So everyone within the organization, and to answer your second question of how to assure that the tech is used in a proper way, I would say it's a collective effort. It's not just one person within the organization who can take care of that. It has to be a shared responsibility between the users, the board members, who has to set the tone, or making sure that the management is setting the right tone. Yeah. It's about developers and operators that needs to prioritize ethical practices. It's about regulators who have to introduce a framework to apply, and we have already two of them with the EU AI Act, and also in the US with the executive order paper that was produced with the Biden organization. And last but not least, the consumer must encourage appropriate usage of AI with a responsibility behind that.
Trust must be a huge factor with this.
It's amazing.
Like research like the Edelman Trust Barometer is showing that it's really declining, and it's going across the board everywhere. These insecurities are putting so much pressure on everybody. What do you think's driving that? Because it's a two-sided sword. It feels like you could get more trust because you have the data, but the barometer's saying it's going down.
Yes, that's on this one. I feel that the more people don't understand what's happening, the more they are frightened.
Right.
So the more you get into innovation, if you see that innovation, for example, is managed by the politics, people lose completely confidence in the system, and then they lose trust. So how we can regain and rebring trust in the system is really something that should be on top of the agenda of the society overall.
So how do you do that? How do you reframe trust and bring that back into
Right.
the organization so that you can handhold people and make them feel that they're safe?
It's really a great question. And by the way, it's we are the Innovation Realize event,
Yep,
and it's
yep,
all
yep.
about rethink. So it's about rethink risk, it's about rethink trust, and rethink confidence. And one comment I like to make is that with the increasing speed of implementation of technology, people get frightened because they don't understand. And so it's, and for me, there is a big difference. It was mentioned, by the way, at the panel this morning. There is a big difference between knowing and understanding.
Right.
And I think that one of the reasons why people are losing traction and losing confidence is that they know that this is happening, but they don't understand what it means for them. So how to bridge the gap and come back to something which people can understand. I think it starts with communication.
Yeah.
It starts with transparency also. It's about clarity of what we try to achieve with the tool,
Yeah.
rather than imposing things. And in particular, when I said that already, but when it comes to innovation, people are concerned that politics have too much influence on science at the moment. So they completely lose momentum on the impact of innovation on society. So it's critical to restore trust in the promise of innovation, to ensure the implementation is as important as the innovation, to establish partnership also between business and public sector. We see that more and more. It was discussed at the COP28, by the way.
Yeah.
And integrate science with society in ways that build trust, really, in expert recommendation. So more broadly, I would say that the more you increase the speed of change and the uncertainty, the more you create a sense of instability, undermining trust in business and everything you do. In addition, with COVID-19, it didn't help, as you know, not surprisingly. And looking at the World Economic Forum survey, 54% of respondents anticipate some instability and global catastrophe to increase. So this is one driver, which is about instability and how to making sure that also the information or the misinformation is not increasing the impact or the feeling of uncertainty on top of everything I described already. So cybersecurity is a key element in the overall ecosystem. And because we have seen a significant loss in trust, for example, resulted from incident where sensitive consumer data has been compromised. So bringing confidence and trust, for me, has never been as important as now. And the role of auditor in this context is more than ever critical because given our independence, the professional skepticism that we apply in this context, it's absolutely critical to bring confidence to the market and to the investor overall. And within the organization, you know, you have 4 lines of defense, right? You have, and you need to keep this framework and provided that the line of defense are agile enough to adapt to a new environment. Because if we keep the line of defense as is, without changing a little bit the framework in which they work to address the risk of tomorrow, then you are not able to address and bring the trust that the organization are needed.
That's so great to hear that
Yes.
you guys are thinking like this.
Yeah.
So going back, right, you've got the companies rethinking their approach to risk management for today's environment. Are there new mindset, skills, competencies, and approaches that they need to develop internally and with partners to be able to achieve this?
Interestingly, when you think about, there was a question this morning about behavior. What kind of behavior or competency do you need to rethink? And I think one characteristic is around resilience. is how you are able to navigate in a complex environment, asking the right questions without putting more stress in the organization than needed.
Yeah.
I think finding the right balance, the fact that you are addressing questions and being transparent with your people doesn't mean that you are putting stress in the organization. You just show to people that you are addressing the right questions, the what if question, which is something really important. And for me, uncertainty, in fact, is a window of opportunity. Mm. And you need to, exposing yourself to something new shouldn't be felt as being a constraint. It should be felt as being an opportunity, or even being inspirational. And providing purpose to your people, provided that there is informed confidence. That, to me, is absolutely critical, meaning that you have the right process in place, the right framework, and also the agility of adapting to circumstances rather than saying we do as before. And last but not least is about humility. You need to be humble to continuously learn. Within EY, we are a learning organization.
Yeah.
What I am doing as a partner now is completely different from what I was doing before, and that's what I like.
Yeah.
And I keep on learning. For example, on dealing with non-financial data, I had to take 90 hours of training just to understand what CSRD means, just as an example. So a culture of resilience for me is based on 3 takeaways. The first one is foster a culture where you developed a lot of transparency within the whole organization. Second one is to stay informed about emerging risk and disruption continuously, and making sure that you understand your ecosystem. You share that with your different people, with the organization, but also outside of the organization, moving with your stakeholders all together. And also I see the role of the chief risk officer regaining, I would say, power within the organization. What do I mean by that is that I feel that we are going into an environment where we need to have a more holistic approach to business resilience. And it's not just a compliance exercise, it's much more than that. So the shift of risk analysis from just a compliance exercise to something more strategic is something that I observe more and more in the organization. Yeah. And by the way, what's happening with the double materiality matrix concept linked with the CSRD is also a way to regroup all the risk framework as a foundation for the thinking of what is the right strategy for my business. So putting it as a center for me is a way to address the right question and create the right confidence within the organization that we know exactly what's happening.
I'm impressed by the speed of reaction to address these changes in what's happening in the climate. Yeah. Overall then, what do you feel is the role of business and businesses in addressing climate risks? And how does that marry with sort of refocusing and generating long-term value for their stakeholders?
Climate risk is arguably the biggest challenge facing the world today.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Just as an example, I was flying over Panama a few days ago, and I was looking down and I saw all the boats around the canal. Yeah. And I suddenly remember that there was a big draft at the moment, which makes that it shows how climate can really impact just logistics, and because the water is no longer in the canal, so the boat needs to wait. And it happened in the past, but it's happening more and more. So our organization needs to think about that when they think about and modelize their logistic plan to take this into account.
Yeah.
And they do that, but it's a reality. Yeah. So reality is, and through the EY 2023 Sustainable Value Survey, business reported that unfortunately the progress on sustainability is slowing down, let's say. As an example, there was a decline in progress on greenhouse gas emission which is falling from a median of 20% compared to 30% in 2022.
Wow.
Just to name one topic. And many businesses have also extended their deadlines for achieving their climate goals, with the median year shifting backwards from 2036 to 2050. That's a reality.
Wow.
This was described at the COP28. And and what is not helping on top of that is with rising inflation, geopolitical turbulence. This is impacting the business. So it's a permanent debate between short-term and long-term, and how to balance the priorities when it comes to investment, and how to accelerate the sustainability effort in this context. It's not that obvious, I must say. But despite all these challenges, the survey also highlighted that delivering on sustainability initiative has significant benefit for stakeholders. This is proven. So, which is good news. In fact, 52% of the people that have been surveyed said that the financial value created has exceeded their expectation.
Wow.
So, meaning that when you invest on the right topics, there is a return on investment, and the market see it, the consumers see it as well. So, and some of the way that organization can create long-term value, to address your second question, by managing climate risk, include more efficient operations, to start with, the development of new products and services, and a shift to innovative business model. So, for example, business model can be based on more circular economy, as an example. So, for me, the more you address it, not as a constraint, but that clearly as something to reshape your business model, to differentiate on the market, then you put yourself in the winning mindset.
Yeah, repositioning that rethink strategy just presents an array of new opportunities.
Absolutely.
Spectacular.
Yeah.
Can I ask another question?
Sure.
Just as just what we were talking about earlier, as a mountaineer, as you are, which many people may not know, that involves living risk. What lessons do you gain as a leader, being somebody that takes risks on the mountains, the calculated risks? There seems to be a lot of lessons learned from how you actually live your life in how you actually guide the organization to guide other companies. Do you have a philosophy or a way or approach behind how you look at risk?
Yeah, definitely. It's funny because, by the way, I thought about that this morning. Right. Really, no, it's. I'm not kidding. When I was listening to the panel, I thought to myself, what I have learned through my mountain experience is benefiting to my professional life.
Yeah.
Because you are, of course, I am always with a guide, but you learn how to read the mountains, how to read the weather, and how to be humble when you need to be humble. So the mountain and the nature is going to be always stronger than you are. So don't try to fight for things that you know you are not going to win at the end. So understanding your ecosystem, to make the parallel, understanding with whom you are in your team, and calculating what is achievable or not, and in which timing, is exactly what I live in my professional life, right? And so I gain confidence. I was mentioning resilience. That's completely applied to when you do a trip in the mountain. And you can definitely apply that more and more, I would say more than ever, in the business life.
And like Hal was saying this morning, you're thinking about the long game.
Right.
Because you were saying earlier, which I loved, I enjoy going up more than the coming down, right? True. Which most people, I'm a mountaineer, most people like me, I enjoy the coming down. I'm miserable on the way up. But that's where you find the thrill. But is that because you're thinking of the long game? You're calculating everything in the ecosystem so that the journey up is more enjoyable? Because you know, if it comes down, what to do.
No, exactly. And it's also, this morning, someone was saying you need to be curious.
That's right.
And when you climb, you are curious of what you are going to see at the top, right?
Right.
when you go down, you know exactly what you.
It's all behind you.
It's behind you, right?
Yeah.
So it's a way of looking at things, which is to be open-minded, to be curious, and that's what I like as well.
I love it. I love that. You sound like the perfect woman for the job. It's fantastic. Jeanne, thank you so much for spending time with us.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure.
Look forward to hearing more of your incredible work during the rest of the conference.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.